The Consulting Success podcast is powered by the Clarity Coaching Program. If you'd like to work directly with the Consulting Success team and receive personal coaching and support to optimize and grow your consulting business, marketing, and revenue, visit consultingsuccess.com to find out more and apply.
Welcome to the Consulting Success Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Zapersky. In this podcast, we'll dive deep into the world of elite consultants, where you'll learn the strategies, tactics, and mindset to grow a highly profitable and successful consulting business.
Hey everyone, it's Michael Zapersky, and welcome back to another episode of the Consulting Success Podcast. Today, I'm very glad to be joined by Michael F. Schein. Michael, welcome.
It's so great to be here, Michael.
Yes, so we got two Michaels here. We're going to go back and forth. It's Michael Super Session today. Michael, you are the president of Microfame Media. You're a writer, you're a speaker. You've worked with clients like the Medici Group, the University of Pennsylvania, a bunch of tech companies over the years. And you also write for publications like Fortune, Forbes, Huffington Post, Psychology Today, the author of the book, The Hype Handbook, 12 Indispensable Success Secrets from the World's Greatest Propagandists, Self-Promoters, Cult Leaders, Mischief Makers, and Boundary Breakers. And you were kind enough to send me a copy of your book, and I really enjoyed it. So we're going to definitely dive into some of those principles and how the community of consultants here can benefit from that. But before we get into how people can scale their business and position themselves as recognized experts in their industry and in their niche, you got started way back in the day. And even before you got involved in consulting and running your own media business, you had a lot of different types of jobs. Can you talk a little bit about kind of what that was like, bouncing around from different jobs, and what was your experience before you actually figured out, hey, this is what I'm good at, this is what I should do?
Yeah, I mean, jobs, projects, whatever you want to call it. I know that most business owners, especially entrepreneurs, have a bit of a zigzag path, and that was definitely me. I never wanted to be involved in business at all. I was always interested in ideas, which is why I ended up working with consultants, because consultants are nothing if not in the business of selling ideas. But I was always coming up with crazy ideas, and they had nothing to do with businesses. I wasn't one of those guys who was selling baseball cards in the back of the school. I was coming up with novels and band ideas and board games and all of this kind of stuff. And so after college, I told my parents, actually, I think it was at the graduation dinner, as they love to, or brunch, they love to remind me, that I was going to go to New York. And what I really cared about was starting a band and revolutionizing rock and roll. Which, in fairness, it was 1999, which was a very, very bad year for rock and roll. So you could see why I thought I might be able to do that. But they weren't happy. They kind of were like, "Do you sing well?" And I was like, "Not really." And they were like, "Are you a good guitar player?" I was like, "Not really." But that's what I decided to do. Did better than anyone thought we would do. We certainly didn't make it in the end, which is pretty tough. But we used to sell this club out, Arlene's Grocery, on a regular basis. We had a residency there. We were on TV once, that kind of thing. Had a lot of fans. The way we would make that happen is we would, as we called it, hype up the show. We never knew from marketing. That was a business term, but we would do all kinds of crazy antics to hype up the show. But that didn't end up working out. The band broke up, as bands do, and I needed a job. So I got this job at a company that had a big parent company that operated call centers, but the founder was always starting these side businesses. And they brought me in to start this entertainment business, which failed very badly, but I guess I did an okay job there. So they shifted me into the call center business. And 10 years later, I was a senior vice president at a contact center industry. At that time, really hating my life. It was cool in the beginning because I was learning some things, but I felt that I was sort of trapped. And so from there, long story, got the courage together, became a business copywriter, a freelance writer, had to figure out how to attract attention. Marketing didn't help me. Learning all the marketing technology did nothing for me. So I looked back to my band days and thought about how I used to hype up things and how there might be a difference between hype and marketing. And when I took that mindset, it slowly but surely evolved into the business I have today.
I want to get into the word hype because I think it has such a negative connotation for so many people. Before we do that, let's go back in time. So your parents are sitting down having that brunch. They're saying, "Are you crazy? You want to go to New York and start a rock band?" Looking back on that as a parent, or for those that have kids that are joining us right now, would you handle that situation differently if you were the parent in that situation? Or what do you think kind of is the lesson learned for those that have younger kids who want to do something that to the parent might seem really crazy?
I think about this a lot because I used to really buy into the romantic vision that whatever your kids want you to do, it's their dream and you should do that. But At the same time, I was lucky in that I got out. I learned lessons, but I think I was smart enough or scared enough to, after a couple of years of doing that and realizing that I wasn't making it happen financially, we had a following that I wasn't making a living. I got out. I learned the lessons. So I know a number of people who really have this one dream. I want to write abstract novels, play garage rock music, and nothing else will satisfy me. And you look at them and they're 40, 45, even sometimes 50 years old, and they're really living a tough life because they're so hyper fixated on that dream. So maybe what I would say to my kid, not that parents ever really have the answer and every situation is different, is give it a shot, but try to keep your eyes open for unintended consequences. Because I think it's that hyper fixation, that not having a plan B that celebrities always talk about. That's a bit of a survivorship bias because they're the ones who make it. Whereas most people without a plan B are just broke.
Let's fast forward then now to your time of being a copywriter and wanting to start to build that into a career. You mentioned that you spent a lot of time and energy kind of learning and studying the typical kind of status quo approach to marketing, which was not working for you. You went back to thinking about your days of the rock band and how hype plays a role in the success of many rock bands, as well as many other areas of the world and organizations and businesses. But why don't we just first explore what this word hype means? Because I think many people, especially in this social media age that we're in, it's like hype is everywhere. Hype is a negative thing. People that hype themselves, typically it's all about ego and fancy cars and airplanes. So talk a little bit about like what is hype in your mind, or how do you think about hype and the power of it for businesses?
It's a really key question, especially to what I do, because I think it's one of those words that doesn't have a set definition. A lot of communities, especially the world word that you're talking about, what it basically means is drumming up a lot of smoke and attention around something where the stuff itself isn't really good, right? And for that reason, I was actually almost going to not call the book the Hype Handbook. Something changed my mind, and just you can suss out that I'm a music fan, but there's one community where hype is positive word, and it's hip hop. So if you like rap music, which many people do, we can say that the rap groups or rappers who are producing records are creating a good product. People listen to those songs and like the songs, right? But in the hip hop world, even the best rappers are always talking about hype. A lot of rap groups, especially in the 80s and 90s, had a hype man who was someone whose specific role was to drive a lot of energy, a lot of attention to the band, get the energy of the crowd up. But they were part of the group, right? I mean, that was a distinct part of the group. So I think the reason that people like us, I don't want to assume anything about you, but a relatively stable upbringing, some opportunities, think of hype often as a negative thing, is that we have other channels. We're firmly in the center of the conversation, even though we've worked hard and struggled. If you follow the rules and do A, B, C, and D, you'll probably get E. Whereas if rap was born in the South Bronx, it's the most economically disadvantaged area in the country. They're literally making music out of trash, out of discarded records from castaway bins. And they made something beautiful, depending on what your tastes are. And they don't have the luxury to market things, to sell things. They hype things up. And so to me, the way I define hype is any set of activities that creates a large amount of emotion among a large number of people to get them to take a specific action. And that action can be a negative action. It can be a positive action. But really, in a lot of cases that I've studied, even though I looked at some really terrible people, hype adds color to the work itself. I mean, without Flavor Flav, Public Enemy wouldn't be as good, right? So
I think it's a great explanation and so true, because in the consulting business, you have to market yourself. You have to put yourself out there. And if you're not visible, if you're not known, you could be the best at what you do, but no one would even know that you exist. And so whether you call that marketing, you call that promotion, you call that business development, you call it hype, it's still part of getting the story out there and making sure that people know about you. So let's go back then to your early days. You started copywriting, you started kind of building the business. And I'd love actually to even get more into like Microfame Media as your current company. How do you go about, or how did you go about getting your first few clients in those days?
I had a great idea for a business that was actually a terrible idea. It was really good on paper. So I was in the call center industry, not telemarketing. It's the BPO industry, they call it, business process outsourcing. So we would basically answer the phones for large corporations. And it's a very large industry. It's one of those, not underground industries, but industries that doesn't have a lot of glamour around it. That's a multi-billion-dollar industry. So I directly reported to the CMO by the end of my time there. And we were always looking for writers who understood the business and also who understood telecom, because that was another side of what we did. And so I ended up always writing a lot of this stuff. And I could have used the help. So my business plan was, well, there's this niche. I'll become a white paper writer and a case study writer and a web copy writer for the BPO industry. And I'll obviously do well because I'm a good writer and because people in that industry will hire me. So I think I got one client that was in that industry and that was it. I just couldn't get clients in that industry. I got hired really quickly. My sister worked in an SEO company that went from 5 employees to 150 employees that needed web copy done. They paid me like $500 to do that so I could expand my portfolio. After that, I didn't do too well. I mean, once in a while I would get clients, but I had a year's worth of savings. Here and there, I'd have clients, but I wasn't succeeding. And I'm a good writer. I mean, everyone I worked with would hire me again when they needed the job, but it's project-based. I have many things I'm bad at in this world, but writing isn't one of them. So I was about ready to give up. I was really upset. And it wasn't a function of the cream rises to the top, right? Like we hear this thing like a lot of consultants feel that they don't have to market themselves because their ideas are so good. Well, I did want to market myself. I read every marketing book that there was. I took classes. I almost got Google Analytics certified, but realized it wasn't helping me after a while. The whole thing didn't do very much for me. I mean, I was doing all of the activity. And then I had this revelation that I don't like the word marketing anymore because what it means to most people is pushing the right buttons. It shouldn't mean that. But when you talk to someone about marketing, they'll say things to you like, oh, yes, I post blogs 4 times a week and I keep a content calendar. I'm building lots of inbound links, or I'm using click funnels to build sales funnels. And then I'll say, what's the psychology behind that? Like, how are you getting large numbers of people to take action? And it's kind of like blog posting 4 times a week, podcasting. And what I realized was it made a lot more sense for me to think about what are those levers in the human psyche, especially in groups, that get people to take action. So the kind of things I started to do, I would write articles and I would pick fights with prominent gurus, not in a trolling kind of way, but I would see all of this really bad advice in the worlds that I wanted to reach. And I would systematically dismantle these gurus and show how the way they structured sales arguments got people to take action, even if it wasn't good for them. And those gurus would respond to me directly. And then all of these people who secretly felt the same way I did would be kind of like, you're a really smart guy. The emperor's got no clothing and you called it out. And we'd have a conversation. And before long, they'd be hiring me to do the same thing for them. That's not marketing. I use the internet. That's marketing. It should be marketing, but people don't think of that as marketing. So I thought people love adversarial kind of dynamics. What if I tapped into that? So I made this distinction in my mind between what are those strategies that could work, whether you're using scrolls, printing presses, or Twitter, and then what are those kind of quote unquote marketing things, which is more of a distribution channel. And that was my own dynamic. And then I just sort of started applying that vocabulary to the people I worked with.
So I want to get deeper into all that. Before we go there, though, taking a step back to why do you think what you did not work for you? So here you are very knowledgeable about, at a high level, like studying marketing and what works for others. You made an attempt. You got a little bit of success here and there, some projects coming your way, but it didn't click. Looking back now, many years later, over the actions that you took, the mindset that you had, what do you feel was really the core reason that you didn't see success with the actions you took originally?
Do you remember about 8 years ago or so, blogging was the biggest thing in marketing? Every single person had a blog. And I did a talk back then to a bunch of entrepreneurs, usually entrepreneurs who probably had about 5 to 10 employees, so successful, but not massive, right? And there must have been 100 people in the room. And I said, how many people here have tried to blog for their business? And estimate 55 people raised their hand. And I said, how many people here have made $1 from their marketing efforts? And I didn't know what the response would be, but I had a feeling 0 people raised their hand. So I think that I was falling into the trap that so many of us do. You read a book, a business book, especially if you're a learner, right? A lifelong learner, someone who thinks that you can educate yourself out of any problem. And you see the internet runs on content. So if you're consistent with your content and have a call to action, that will work. So you make a content calendar and you put up 4 blog posts a week and you always have a call to action. Why does that work? We often don't think about that. It's sort of a magic pill, right? This idea that just having the content and having the call to action will work. Whereas I think what a lot of the people do who sell internet marketing services, and they don't articulate this very well, is they actually think about the psychology first and then match it to the technology. So a Russell Brunson, I don't know if your audience knows who that is, but he owns ClickFunnels, which is probably the premier sort of technology tool for selling online courses. And it's a good technology tool. But he basically, his sales pitch is, if you buy this tool and you follow exactly what I say, set up this thing called a stack benefits presentation and put a little clock on there to create scarcity and then have a form that you fill out, you'll succeed. But everyone is doing the same thing. So you have no competitive advantage. Whereas if you look what Russell Brunson is really doing, he's a hype man. And I mean that in a positive way. He's created a persona that makes him seem very larger than life. He creates a lot of aspirational energy. So if people would watch what he did versus what he teaches, they would do a lot better. But I was following the rule books.
So it sounds like, correct if I'm wrong here, Michael, but back in those days, you were doing the things that quote unquote gurus said you should be doing. So write the blog posts, have the links for the SEO stuff, so on, so on. But there was no real strategy. It was like you were busy doing the tactics, but you didn't have a clear step-by-step of how it all comes together. So
a psychology-based strategy, that's the difference. You can have a technology strategy or an analytics strategy, but if you don't think about that core irrational way that human beings make decisions, that for me and for many of the people I talk to, and for that 100 people who have blogged like crazy and didn't get a result, it doesn't work. It's tons, especially consultants, because they know exactly what you said. It's like, just being good at what I do is almost the least important element, right? Because it's so amorphous. How do you demonstrate that? So I need to generate this energy, this emotion around what I do. So they do all this tactical marketing. But if you look at the consultants who are really, I don't mean the McKinseys, but sort of the mid-level consultants who are really generating attention, they're showmen. They understand groups. I mean, Tom Peters, right? He constantly is calling people out in the audience to generate that little bit of discomfort that we know. There have been scientific papers written on the neurology of why injecting a little bit of pain into an otherwise pleasurable situation creates a bond. And Tom Peters just inherently gets that. It doesn't matter what marketing tactics he's using.
So you really start to make a name for yourself by identifying very visible authorities or experts or leaders and calling them out on something that you felt strongly against. You would see something that just didn't jive with you. And so you would be visible about that and vocal about that. Really, I mean, that's polarization, right? That kind of at its best. And polarization in the marketing world is very powerful. I mean, right? You push away some people, but you attract others. Talk to us a little bit more about maybe one example. I know in your book, you talk about Gary Vaynerchuk and you calling him out on kind of his hustle mindset and mentality. If you want to lead with that one, or if there's maybe even a better example, but just so that people can really see like what are the steps that you took, and just at a high level view, like summarize, here's what I saw first, then here's what I did, and here was the result. Can you kind of walk us through one of those examples?
Yeah, I can talk about what I did, or I can talk about what a business did that was almost more sophisticated than what I did. What would be sort of more useful, do you think?
Let's start with yours first, because I think that, as you call it, a more basic example would just be a good jumping off point for people to understand the concept. Because for so many, the idea of conflict and polarization is one they shy away from, right? You want to play safe. You don't want to ruffle any feathers, but you're saying the exact opposite. So let's kind of begin there and see where it takes us.
So Gary Vaynerchuk is a great example. So I don't know how familiar your audience would be with Gary Vaynerchuk, because he's one of those people that, as I always say, in some audiences, he's Elvis. And then in other spaces, he's nothing. Nobody knows what he is. He's a true micro celebrity. And in my world, he's certainly a big deal. So he's in some ways the preeminent sort of social media, personal branding, internet guru. And I have nothing but respect for him in a lot of ways. It's nothing personal. I think he's a great businessman. He had this business called Wine Library TV. He took his father's wine distribution business, which I think did about $3 million a year in revenue, which is a good starting place. But he turned it into a massive, massive company. And the way he did that was he created this internet TV show called Wine Library TV. And he presented wine in this very down-to-earth kind of bro-y sort of way, because that's his persona. So he would come unshaven in a hoodie and sort of describe wine to like Cinnamon Toast Crunch and Fruit Loops and curse a lot. And that was unheard of. And it built this big following, and he did really, really well with that. So because that was so successful, people wanted to know how he marketed things so well on the internet. So he sort of built this career that he's known for now as being this guru around promoting yourself online. And his whole shtick is hustle. So he's had to ramp this down a little lately because the world has changed. But when I wrote this article, he would get up on stage and he would say, using a curse word, which I won't use because this is a family program, but he would say, I get up in the middle of the night at 3 a.m. with my phone and I'm on the toilet and I go to the bathroom, but he didn't say go to the bathroom. And I'm tweeting while I'm going to the bathroom because that's how hard you have to work on the internet, on social media to be successful. And if you're not doing that, basically, it's cool that you want a cubicle job, but that's all you'll get. And I would listen to this and I would think to myself, something about this doesn't sit right, because it's one thing if you're marketing the wine or selling the wine, but what if you're making the wine? What if you own a vineyard? Should you be spending all your time tweeting about the vineyard, or should you be trying to make a better wine? Also, it's a terrible way to live. And also, the only one who seemed to be getting rich was Gary. I mean, he has all these fans and most of them are young men. I don't know any Elon Musks coming out of the rank of Vaynerchuk fans, right? So it seemed like the person getting rich was Gary. And so I started to do some research on cults. And one thing that almost all religious cults have in common is that they get their followers to work very, very, very hard for salvation. But what it really does is it bonds the cult leader to the followers, because there's a sunk cost dynamic happening where if you've worked really, really hard on behalf of a movement, and then you start to have doubts about that movement, it's really tough to have internal sort of continuity in your head and say, well, I just wasted my time for 3 years for this thing. So you double down. So I took him to task for that. Now, I had an ulterior motive. The way I did copywriting, I would sell packages of my writing after a while, and I would write a lot of material very quickly. And then sometimes I would give the team the templates, the client the templates for doing it after I left, which was a higher price point. So Magento, I did a bunch of case studies for them, which was the basis of their early marketing campaign when they got serious, when they really brought in a head of product. And I built their template for producing case studies to drive leads. So I was all about systemization.
When you said you took Gary to the task specifically, like what did you do?
Right. So that the ulterior motive was I wanted to show that a systemized approach was better than a brute force approach. So I wrote an article in Inc., which I happened to write for the time, that said why Gary Vaynerchuk is flat out wrong. And if you read the article, it's still out there. I am nothing but complimentary. I talk about how he was a great business person, et cetera, et cetera. But then I say exactly what I just said to you. I said the idea of working around the clock is not sustainable. It benefits Gary more than the people listening, et cetera. So I didn't think anything of it. I mean, I wasn't far along in my career yet. I was a little bit scared to send it, but the bands I played in were punk bands. So I always had that punk rock attitude of like, let's do this, even though it's scary and offend people a little bit. That night, Gary himself made a video talking about me by name. And he went off for like 30 minutes talking about this article. And he started off very respectful. And by the end, he was obviously very, very, very agitated because no one ever calls this guy out, or didn't then. So then my phone started blowing up. All of his fans started like lambasting me. They were calling me lazy, which was very funny because I've never worked so hard in my life as I was during this time. I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm an idiot. I'm destined to be poor forever, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I just thought that that was it. I woke up the next morning and there were 50 new Twitter followers, and then 100, and then 300. So it turned out there were all of these people out there who were hearing this message that it didn't resonate with them. It does resonate with a lot of people, and they were the ones who called me out. But now there was someone who stepped forward and said, I'm against this way of looking at the world. So now they have a leader. Now they can define themselves against the hustle mentality in a very organized way. And I started to build a following. People started to read my articles a lot more. I started to get client calls. So I started writing more articles like that. And it was very, very successful for me and very profitable.
While we work with a lot of seasoned and experienced consultants here at Consulting Success, I'm often contacted by new early stage consultants. Invariably, the question I'm asked is, what are the steps I should take to become a successful consultant and grow my consulting business to my first 6 figures per year? Well, I'm excited to announce that we've opened the doors for our Momentum program. This is our most popular program for early stage consultants, and it has helped almost 1,000 consultants to start, run, and grow successful consulting businesses. It gives you the step-by-step plan to help you with your messaging, your fees, and pricing strategies, how to win more proposals, how to go to market more effectively, developing a marketing system to generate leads consistently, and so much more. And right now, until September the 19th, you can sign up for Momentum and get 50% off the regular price by going to consultingsuccess.com/audio. That's consultingsuccess.com/audio, AUDIO. Only 100 spots are available to join Momentum and get 50% off. This deal is only available until September the 19th or until all 100 spots are gone. We won't be opening up new spots in this program for several months, so don't wait. Go to consultingsuccess.com/audio. That's consultingsuccess.com/audio, AUDIO. So Michael, I'll jump in because I appreciate you sharing that example. If we were to take the situation of a consultant who's listening to this right now going, okay, that makes sense. I may or may not feel comfortable with the idea of doing something like that where it is creating some conflict. Put that aside for a moment. You had the benefit of a connection, a relationship with Inc., which is the platform you were writing for. If somebody's listening to this right now and they're saying, yeah, I really do like this idea, there are things, maybe not even people, but there are mindsets or concepts or just established ways of doing things that I don't agree with in my industry. And I see an opportunity to kind of speak up against that and therefore get the power of polarization happening. But I don't have the connection with Inc. or with an established platform to get my ideas out there. What would your advice be to them? How could they use the power of this concept, even if they don't have an established platform?
It's a great question because the established platform I had is a little deceptive and it really leads into another hype strategy. So bear with me while I kind of get to the center of this concept because it's very key. The reason I had that Inc. column, because this was very early in my career, was because I knew I wanted to write a column and I was not having a lot of luck at all. And I worked at a place at the time called the Brooklyn Writers Space, which if you know about Park Slope, Brooklyn, there's a lot of writers there, very writerly sort of area. And it's this place that as long as you're a serious writer, you can write out of there. Serious doesn't mean published. It means that you're taking it seriously. So because it's Brooklyn, there was everybody from Jonathan Lethem, who's a huge novelist, wrote out of there at a time, but also just random journalists and things. So there was this woman Diane Mehta, who really changed my life. We were friends because we were part of this community. And I overheard her talking one day about how she was really overwhelmed because she was doing work for Inc. And now all of the editors were responsible for finding writers to write for free. And she didn't know where she was going to find people. And I said, I'll do it. And she said, well, you have to apply. And I said, well, I have a blog. I'll send in some of my blog samples. And I sent in the blog samples and they brought me on. So my point in bringing this up is that there's another hype strategy. There's 12 hype strategies in the book, 12 hype strategies in our work. The first one is this idea of make war, not love, pick a fight. And the second one is called build a secret society. And what that means is that all great hype artists make it seem like their success is very grassroots, that it just kind of bubbles up and comes out of nowhere, or that they built a platform very organically, made it happen. But what almost all of them do, if not all of them, is that they simultaneously work beneath the surface to create sort of a cabal of people around them that will pull strings for them. And so the way to do that is to look for things that are cheap for you to give up. I don't mean financially, but that are just easy or doable for you to give up, that are valuable for other people, and to go into communities where there's a dense sort of group of the kind of people you want them to meet. So I worked at this Brooklyn writer space. It was easy to work there. All you had to do was pay a fee and show that you were interested. I was in the right location, Brooklyn. But when I overheard Diane talking about a problem she had, I could have said, oh man, that seems like a pain in the neck to like do free writing. I need to be paid for my writing. But it was really cheap for me to do. I wasn't doing a lot of work because I wasn't doing well at my career at that time. So I gave that to her and I solved the big problem for her. So what I would recommend, and you can do this online, is put yourself in communities where there's a high density of the kind of people that can make things happen for you. Sort of benevolently stalk them to see if there are things that you can connect around common interests. You can do this on Twitter, Instagram, Reddit, in person. And then when you find an opportunity, I call this personal arbitrage. When you find an opportunity to do something that would be really meaningful for them, but pretty doable for you to do, jump on that. If you can help someone's kids, if you can make an introduction that's not just one of these networking introductions where you throw 5 random introductions at people, but it's something that you heard them talking about that could get them a job that would change their life, but it's your best friend and there's no social capital that you're expending, do it. And if you're constantly keeping your eyes open for that and you do that on a regular basis, you'll be very well positioned to accelerate your platform very quickly when you need to.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. Let's transition into your company and kind of the work that you're doing today, as well as how you got to where you are. To begin with, the structure of the company. Is there a team? Who's involved? What does that look like? Full-time contractors? Walk us through the structure of the company as it sits currently.
Well, we finally landed on a business model that is the most fun I've ever had at our company. And it's almost like we cracked this puzzle. So after the copywriting business, a lot of people wanted the quote unquote marketing that got me the clients because I would talk about it a lot. And so I hadn't really formulated my ideas on hype yet, but I was good at this thing that I was still thinking of as marketing. So I started to bring on clients to do that. And that became the bulk of my business. So for quite a few years, it was at least structurally an agency. We had our own way of doing things. We used these sort of mass psychology principles, but we would promote ourselves, find clients, do a sales proposal. They would come on in a retainer agreement, and we would be responsible for doing the work for them. So we would set up goals. We would run whatever tactical programs would execute this strategy. And as a result, I had a sizable team. We had social media experts. We had project managers. We had all of this stuff. After a period of time, what I realized, especially when I started solidifying my ideas around hype and starting to write the book, was that way we were doing our clients a disservice. Not only is that a really high overhead model, so I have selfish reasons for wanting to have changed the model, there's this dynamic that happens where if a client throws money at a problem, and I say this with all respect because I've done this too, but if they say, go market me, you're an expert in marketing, go market me, there's this weird dynamic where they sort of relinquish any involvement. They might micromanage you. They might try to tell you what to do when it's a weird relationship, certain kinds of clients. But for the most part, it's kind of like, make this happen for me. And especially when you're dealing with whatever you want to call it, personal branding, hype, driving a lot of attention around ideas, it's very challenging when the client doesn't show up in the same way that you're promoting them, right? So like you go out there and you run these campaigns, and then let's say you have this very like edgy branding for them, and then they show up dressed like a schlub talking about outside the box solutions, win-win engagements. You have a total disconnect, right? It doesn't ring true. Also, selfishly, there's this hedonic treadmill that happens where you can get the best results in the world for a client and they'll be happy for 2 months. And then the new baseline is that new sort of thing. And you just keep sort of a lot of difficult conversations as you navigate how to get them results. So we made a great living like that. We had a lot of great engagements. But at a certain point, I realized, what if I tried to weave this new concept of hype into our clients' DNA? What if I tried to arm them so that they were not only getting the results, but that they started to think like a hype artist, right? So what we started to do, first with a few clients and now with everybody, because it's better for them, is that we do gambits, basically experiments. We go hype principle by hype principle. We inculcate them so that they truly understand this hype principle. And then we together, using some tools that we've designed, these really sophisticated hype gambits. And by sophisticated, I mean, it's not just blog 4 times a week. It's doing something very sort of really makes you stand out, or that really kind of pushes those psychological buttons the target market has. And then they have to go out and sort of put one foot in front of the other to do the work. But they come back and we constantly redesigning the gambit, redesigning the experiment until the whole company becomes a hype machine. So it's sort of this strange mix of a consultancy, think tank, and a marketing agency. That model has changed everything. I mean, our clients have become much more successful. They view the world as hype artists. There's this downward trickle effect where they teach their team members whenever they are working on a new product, think about how you're talking about the product, think about how you're showing up.
Has that changed the structure of your company, the number of people you have?
Yeah. We don't have a lot of full-time people anymore. I think Michalowicz once said the old definition of success was having a large team and a large office space. Now it's having a small team, a small office space, and lots of profits. So it was really hard for me to let go of having that large team because I considered that a marker of success. We eventually really streamlined things. And as a result, better results and more profitable.
And with that, give me kind of sense of your engagements. Is a typical engagement like 5,000, 10,000, 50,000, 100,000, a million? Like where do your typical kind of engagements sit with clients? And is there a progression of a shift in how that works?
I mean, people often ask me this and I talk in terms of averages because it depends on the engagement. But I would say that our average investment from clients sits around 5,000 a month, things all around that. It's interesting because theoretically, a client should be able to work with us for a year and have what they do so deeply embedded in their DNA that they can then move on. And sometimes they do. But what we found is interesting. Once we figure out what that combination of hype strategies that works is, then it's about making sure that it scales up, making sure that it rolls out, making sure that it's maintained, making sure that you're building on it. Because every marketing or hype or promotional strategy eventually dies because people get used to it. So we've been really pleasantly surprised to see that clients have kept us on sort of on an ongoing basis to keep working with them. But yeah, that's the average sort of spend per month.
And is the pricing strategy that you use today, because you mentioned you have different price points around that level, has the pricing strategy or the structure that you use for pricing changed over time? Anything that you've learned didn't work for you or works better for you today?
It's the age-old question, right? When you're selling services, it's not as simple as like, my materials are this much. Let's figure out what I'm going to sell it for. And I've struggled with it a lot. When I had a team, I absolutely had to set a certain price in order to make it worth our while as a company because you have payroll. I still have a team, but it's so bare bones now. The team is completely involved in making the operations run. Like, so we have office manager. I say like, because we don't really have an office anymore, an office manager type role / project manager. We have an experience designer, like a curriculum designer, things like that. But those kind of account executives who run marketing for people, we don't have to bake that overhead into it, that variable cost in anymore. So now I really try to think about, it sounds like a cliche, but what's the value we're providing, right? I mean, what is that amount of money that's fair? If I'm frank, I ask myself the question, what would I resent having to work on this project for and have my team work on it for? Because I think they're getting so much out of it that charging them this amount of money, I would actually resent working on it. So I've had the luxury to be able to structure my pricing that way, in a way that when I had a big, fat, massive team, I wasn't able to do.
Have there been any changes to how you structured the actual engagements? I mean, you mentioned that you went from the agency model to now more of, it sounds almost like it's done with you in terms of you provide recommendations, you give a program, you provide advice, but the client is actually the one kind of doing a lot of the work and they'll support them through that. But is there any big changes in terms of, we used to engage in not the agency model, but just anything that happened over the last 6, 12 months, or even before that, just from a service offering perspective, that's been a big learning for you?
I think the reason I said that everything clicked into place more than anything else is that I can now offer our services and deliver those services with the exact same structure that I presented in the beginning. And what I mean by that, when I had the agency, when you're doing something for, or when Microfame Media was more of an agency, you just have to get results, and the results are on you. And so you can have all of the best laid plans. So I could say to you, listen, I'm going to market your business, and here's the game plan that we're going to use. And we're going to do this in week 1 of month 1. Then we're going to roll out this social media program, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But you're essentially their outsourced marketing department. So what happens is either you have to adjust in the beginning because you're dealing with human beings and you don't know what's going to work. And then the client gets nervous and they start trying to direct you, or you're very successful very early and they get used to that. And then they start saying, well, where are the new ideas? What are the new suggestions, et cetera? And the way that I was able to win in that chaotic environment was becoming chaotic. So a client would say to me, what are your new ideas? And I'm full of ideas. So I'd give them new ideas that had nothing to do with what we started with at. And now I'm running around like a chicken without a head, implementing these new ideas. A client is starting to mistrust what we're doing, even though it's only been 3 weeks and there's no rational reason to mistrust it. What do? I start taking assignments from them. I should never do that. I had a client who was giving her account manager assignments like he was her employee. And I had to tell her to stop doing that. And she hung up the phone on me. And I said, I tried a million ways to quote unquote set up boundaries, right? That's what they tell you to do, have boundaries, but it just wasn't doable. So what I do now is just structured process that works. There is a grid. There are certain exercises we do at various points to get the ideas out of your head and into an experimental structure. There's a score sheet called the WINS score sheet that is extremely well tested and works very well for determining whether an experiment is getting you to where you need to be. And the thing runs like a machine because it just more like a product than a service.
I think this will resonate with many people. It's going from very customized engagements and projects where you're still applying your expertise, but you're not necessarily following a framework, to then establishing a very clear framework, a very clear process. And even though the recommendations, the advice, the ideas that can come up during that engagement with the client as they go through the framework can be customized to their situation, the process and the steps you're taking them through are part of that framework. And so it's easier for you and for your team to follow those things, but it conveys and communicates a lot more expertise to the client because they feel more confident knowing that you have this process. So they need to follow. It's not just as custom, and therefore you're taking them through that. So we've seen that with so many clients over the years, but I think it's a really great example of kind of going from a lot more kind of chaos to more structure and the benefits of doing that and kind of creating like productized offerings.
It's ironic because my mindset, and I'm sure a lot of your listeners' mindsets, is that if my client says jump, I say how high, because that's how I'm giving good service, right? It's like I'm going to outwork everybody else and show that I'm the best service provider out there. And that doesn't work because what happens is this whole idea of under promise, over deliver. I'm not sure I buy it because the over delivering becomes the new standard. So if you set up a dynamic where your client asks you once to write a 3-page sales email and you do it just to do it, you'll be writing 3-page sales emails forever. You won't get your main job done that they paid you for, and the client will be less happy with you. And this isn't about setting boundaries because you can set boundaries all day and your client will say, well, I'm not getting what I paid for. I want that 3-page email. Why aren't you doing it for me? That's where it becomes complicated. The trick is to say, I have a process that works and it's laid out, and you must have this process. You can't lie about this. You have to actually have a tested process that works. But if you follow this process, it works. And if you deviate from this process, you're only harming yourself. It doesn't work. And I would say polish and packaging is a part of that. If you just tell someone, I have a process, here's what it is, they'll just think you're trying to say no to what they're doing. But if you say, here's a really nicely laid out grid that I've created that shows you the process, and we fill out the blanks, and it's called this thing. And according to this schedule, which I'm going to show you in full color, we put markers on the thing. You would think that that's just polish, that that's just packaging. But what that says to someone is that this is a real thing that has boundaries to it versus you're just kind of making stuff up as you go along.
That's good advice. And we see so often that why clients are engaging a consultant or an advisor is not for just the thing you're going to do. It's for the result or outcome. And so taking your example of clients, can you write a 3-page email? A great first question or response from a consultant would be, tell me why. Like, what do you want that email to do for you? And then through asking some deep questions, you might be able to show them that, well, the email is fine, but there's actually a much better way to get you the result that you want. Or, yeah, actually, we're going to do this part of this process first for these reasons. So I think it's really about the positioning of peer, right, to the client, and not just being like, sure, you want me to jump? How high do you want me to jump? And the client is up here, you're down there. You want to bring yourself to the same level. And that's really why they're bringing you in, is because you have expertise that they don't have. Michael, I want to thank you for coming on. Before we wrap up, a couple of quick questions for you. The first is, in the last 6 months or so, what's the best book that you have read or listened to? Could be nonfiction, fiction, anything that just you would recommend.
It's funny, I'm such a big reader because I came into this as being an artsy fartsy kind of guy. So I read a lot of nonfiction and I read a lot of fiction. I just started a book and really quickly read half of it, which is really fascinating. The series is called Terra Ignota. And I think the first book is called Too Quick the Lightning or Too Fast the Lightning. It's by Ada Palmer. I read an article about it in Wired magazine, and Craig Newmark from Craigslist really likes it. And it's basically this science fiction series that's based on wrestling with some of the big questions about how a society learns from their history, how they distort things. There's no real utopias and no real dystopias, but it's actually a mixture of both. And it's the kind of book that I don't know how, if or whether it'll help my professional life, but it's not just escapist. It really has you think about big ideas. And I tend to like books with big ideas. And sometimes they work their way into my work. There are so many stories in the Hype Hand book that I just kind of read out of interest that kind of weaseled their way into the book. So that's a good one.
That's a great recommendation. I have not heard of it, but I will check it out. I think you're right that very often books that have nothing to do directly with the work that we're doing can actually give us not only inspiration, but the ideas somehow do work themselves into the work that we're doing or provide us with new kind of perspectives or insights that you're not going to get from just reading the same marketing book or the same business book or management book or whatever that everybody else is reading. Lastly, where can people learn more about you, Michael? Where's the one website we should send them to?
One of the things that I did take from regular old marketing is that you should have only one ask. So I do have a personal website. I do have a company website. I hope you'll put them both in the show notes. But my one call to action is going to be go to Amazon or wherever you buy books and buy the Hype Hand book. Because if you type in the Hype Hand book and read that thing, it'll show you where to find me. But you'll also, if there's ever any chance you're going to work with me, it's by reading my ideas in that book that you're going to be persuaded to work with me. And if not, you're going to learn a lot and hopefully have fun.
Awesome. We'll make sure that's all linked up in the show notes. Michael, thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Consulting Success Podcast. For more episodes and to subscribe, rate, and leave a review, head on over to iTunes. And if you'd like to develop consistent lead flow and a highly profitable consulting business, learn more about our coaching programs at consultingsuccess.com.